We all know about Zoro's dream in One Piece to become the world's strongest swordsman, but to achieve this, he must defeat Dracula Mihawk, the current person to hold that title. But what if instead of being against Mihawk from the get-go, Zoro was actually his son? There isn't much that has been revealed about Mihawk and his past in the original One Piece world. However, in this story, it unfolds like this. In a remote corner of the Grand Line, on an island forgotten by most maps, a boy named Dracula Mihawk was born. The island, shrouded in mist and mystery, was home to a community of skilled swordsmen who practiced an ancient and secret art of swordsmanship that made them almost unmatched in the art of wielding blades. The boy, with piercing hawk-like eyes, much like his parents, displayed an uncanny talent for the blade from an early age and proved to be a prodigy in the art. His parents, humble yet skilled warriors, recognized his potential and nurtured his abilities as Mihawk spent most of his time being trained by the various swordsmen on the island. With his extraordinary eyesight, even from a young age, Mihawk was able to track a swordsman's blade, even when they were moving at high speeds. His parents were extremely proud of him and had great hope that he would be among the strongest on the island. Tragedy struck one day when Mihawk was 13 years old. Due to the immense strength of the swordsmen on the island, the world government determined their threat to be too big to ignore. Despite the fact that the swordsmen were not known to travel too far from their island, the world government wasn't keen on letting them become stronger. In the dead of the night, a massive Buster Call was invoked. The Marines ravaged the island in a sneak attack, killing off a vast majority of the swordsmen before they could fight back. Mihawk was woken up by the explosions outside his house. His father left with his mother, wielding Yoru, a gorgeous, large, white blade with intricate adornments on its hilt and pommel. Mihawk, despite being a prodigy, had never seen a true battlefield until today, and so he sat afraid in his room, holding onto his small sword. His father soon returned, one of his arms cut and bleeding, holding his mother's golden cross-shaped necklace. Mihawk is stunned at the sight and asks where his mother is, only to be dragged out of the house. His father rushes him to a dingy little boat and sails off as the island is in flames. They would somehow make it out of the island alive, but Mihawk's father is on death's bed. He's suffered profuse blood loss from the loss of his arm and the numerous injuries he's sustained. He tells Mihawk that his mother couldn't make it during the Marine attack and they were the only survivors. His father tells him that he won't be able to survive too long either before placing his mother's necklace around his neck and giving Mihawk their family blade, Yoru. After traveling for hours, the two were intercepted by a large sea king. Already on death's door, Mihawk's father kissed his son on the top of the head before telling him to become the strongest in the world. He leaped out of the boat and distracted the sea king, letting the young Mihawk escape. Mihawk traveled for 2 more days, starved and damaged from the loss, before stumbling onto a deserted island. He dragged his own sword and Yoru, finding some ruins to make camp in before finding something to eat. The island was inhabited by pretty big animals, but Mihawk mostly avoided them to forage for food. He continued his training once regaining his energy, driven by his newfound hatred towards the Marines. He soon began fighting against the numerous animals on the island, and 3 years passed. By this point, Mihawk had gotten bigger and had learned to effectively wield the massive Yoru. Having defeated most of the animals on the island, Mihawk made a raft and set off into the world. He spent his years traveling the world, defeating numerous swordsmen and further honing his technique. He frequently fought against formidable Marines and defeated them one after the other, earning him the moniker of Marine Hunter. As time passed, Mihawk turned 19 and heard the news that Gol D. Roger's execution was to take place. Mihawk was present during the Pirate King's execution and would soon interact with Shanks. Being the only person he couldn't effectively defeat, Mihawk developed a rivalry with the red-haired swordsman, clashing on many occasions. Due to the sheer number of battles Mihawk was a part of, Yoru became a permanent Black Blade, a testament to Mihawk's mastery of armament haki. Soon after, Mihawk had an encounter with the daughter of a bandit from the East Blue. Her name was Terra. Despite her being a bandit, the girl took an interest in Mihawk and soon began to pester him to learn more about him. She went so far as to tag along with Mihawk forcibly, annoying the hell out of him. Mihawk soon opened himself up to the girl and even grew feelings for her. It was around this time that he became a warlord of the sea, letting go of his grudge after spending so long decimating the Marines. He opted for the option to reduce the number of battles he had to take part in and protect Terra from the chaos. The two eventually got together and made a home on the island of Kuraigana. The two had a son named Dracula Zoro. Zoro inherited one of his mother's eyes and one eye from his father, having heterochromia. It wouldn't be a few years later until Terra passed away due to an illness, leaving Mihawk alone to take care of Zoro. So this is where our What If saga truly begins, with Zoro being Mihawk's son. How would the world of One Piece change? What would happen to our original protagonist, and how would Zoro become stronger? Let's find out! As soon as Zoro is able to hold a blade, Mihawk begins training him in the way of the sword. In the original timeline, Zoro began training with 3 swords due to his rivalry with Quina. Since he never met Quina in this timeline, Zoro would follow Mihawk's way with a sword. Since childhood, Zoro proved to be a tenacious brat, with Mihawk drilling into him everything he knows about swordsmanship. Zoro didn't have the talent of his father, but his determination and drive were above Mihawk's. Every day, Zoro would wake up at dawn, his small frame casting a long shadow under the early morning sun. Mihawk would hand him a wooden practice sword, and their training would begin. Mihawk started with the basics: footwork, stance, and grip. Zoro would spend hours perfecting his posture, learning to balance his weight and move with agility. He would practice swinging the sword, each strike needing to be precise and powerful. Despite the repetitive nature of the drills, Zoro never complained. His eyes always shone with determination, a burning desire to improve. As Zoro grew, so did the intensity of his training. Mihawk introduced him to various techniques, from parrying to executing swift, lethal strikes. He would often spar with Zoro, pushing him to his limits. These matches were grueling, with Zoro often ending up battered and bruised, but each defeat only fueled his resolve. He would spend nights replaying the battles in his mind, analyzing his mistakes and vowing to overcome them. Going extremely far with his training, Zoro eventually became strong enough to take on the human drills, intelligent primates that mimicked human combat techniques. Mihawk would send him into the forest, where these creatures roamed, armed with only a single sword. The human drills were formidable opponents, mimicking Zoro's movements and attacking in groups. But Zoro, through sheer grit and perseverance, would defeat them. Each victory was a testament to his growing strength and skill. Zoro's dream to become the strongest swordsman in the world took flight when he saw his father clashing with Shanks. It was an astounding battle that left a profound impact on young Zoro. The sheer power and skill displayed by both swordsmen were beyond anything he had ever witnessed. The clash of their swords echoed in his mind, a symphony of strength and determination. This was back when he was 8 years old. A year later, Zoro saw his father disappointed as he learned that Shanks had lost one of his arms. Due to this, Mihawk would no longer consider him his rival, as it wouldn't be a fair fight in his eyes. This event left a mark on Zoro. He saw the fleeting nature of strength and the importance of resilience. It was a lesson in the harsh realities of their world, but it also steeled his resolve. With renewed determination, Zoro's training took on a new intensity. Mihawk began to teach him more advanced techniques, focusing on the mental aspects of swordsmanship, anticipation, strategy, and the art of the duel. Zoro learned to read his opponent's moves, to predict and counter with precision. He trained his senses, becoming attuned to the subtlest shifts in the wind and the faintest sounds of movement. Years passed, and Zoro's skills continued to grow. His training under Mihawk was relentless, but it forged him into a formidable swordsman. The foundations laid by Mihawk, combined with Zoro's unwavering determination, began to show results. Even though he followed Mihawk's way of the sword, Zoro's unique style began to emerge, an embodiment of his spirit and dreams. Mihawk had Zoro accompany him in his numerous escapades as a warlord of the sea, and Zoro had developed an affinity for battlefields. At the age of 19, Zoro left Kurigana Island to find stronger opponents and make a path for himself. Now, let's get back to the topic of Luffy for a bit. How would he fare without his right-hand man by his side? Well, things might end up a bit grimmer than you may think. A bit after Zoro, on another island, a certain Monkey D. Luffy set sail for an adventure of his own. We all know that Zoro was the first person to join up with Luffy during the start of the series, but in this timeline, the two never meet. Luffy would survive most of his fights until the events of Orange Town. We all know that Luffy's powers are great for blunt damage, but swords and sharp objects do a number on him. This was around the time Luffy had to face Buggy, another Devil Fruit user. In the original timeline, Zoro took on Kabaji, Buggy's second mate, and defeated him. But with no Zoro around, Luffy would be overwhelmed by Buggy and Kabaji's duo, quite possibly ending his life. In the timeline where Luffy never meets Zoro, Luffy would instead meet certain death. It's a really grim outlook, and I'm sure you have different opinions on this. But in this, what a story, Luffy would lose his life. Continuing with the story, Shanks would hear the grim news of the kid's demise, sharing it with Mihawk on one of their excursions. Garp would be absolutely devastated at the news, and it wouldn't be long before Ace found out as well. Sabo, on the other hand, wouldn't know about the news until possibly much later, since Luffy wasn't notorious enough to make it into the news at this time. Meanwhile, Zoro would continue on his journey, being exceptionally powerful compared to his strength level during the original timeline, as he spent his entire life training with the strongest swordsman in the world. Zoro would test his skills by fighting various pirates and being a bounty hunter, making occasional stops back to Kurigana to interact with his father, spar, and accompany him on any missions that he accepted from the Marines, such as the mission to pursue Don Creek. On a trip back to Kurigana, Zoro learned of the news that Ace, the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, was caught by the Marines. Much like in the original timeline, Ace was captured by Blackbeard and handed off to the Marines. Zoro also learned that Blackbeard would be filling the role of warlord in place of Jinbei. Unlike in the original timeline, I'll assume that Crocodile still retains his position, along with Gecko Moria. Mihawk is called upon to aid the Marines in the upcoming war with the Whitebeard Pirates, and Zoro would accompany him on the same. At this point, Zoro uses a fairly large Claymore-esque blade, as he's been trained to wield fairly hefty blades, much like his father. The day of the execution soon arrived, and Mihawk gathered with the other warlords of the sea, along with Zoro. The matchup included Gecko Moria, Don Quixote, Doflamingo, Boa Hancock, and Sir Crocodile. Much like in the original timeline, the Whitebeard Pirates appeared, and an all-out battle started. How do you think things would be different in the Paramount War with Luffy out for the count? Well, as the battle starts off in full force, we see Whitebeard cause 2 massive tsunamis with the Gura Gura no Mi, but Kuzan turns them into ice. Mihawk, seeing a chance to test his mettle, sends off the world's strongest slash in Whitebeard's direction, but it is stopped by his commander, Diamond Jozu. The Whitebeard Pirates and and the Marines clashed on Marineford, with Zoro fighting against the Small Fry. He then got to see his father fight against Vista, another commander from the Whitebeard Pirates, and was amazed to see the skill the man possessed. Much like in the original timeline, Sengoku also told the world about Ace's origins and how he is the son of Gol D. Roger. Meanwhile, Garp was going through some extreme levels of internal turmoil, unable to stomach the fact that Ace would meet his end just like Luffy. His head was swamped with guilt at not being there for Luffy during his time of need, but now his duties prevented him from saving his adopted grandson. As the Whitebeard Pirates got closer to the execution stand, the Marines were ordered to execute Ace. In a moment of pure emotion, Garp intervened and destroyed the execution stand before breaking Ace's chains. Upon seeing this, the Marines went into shock, with Sengoku being among the first to transform into his Zoan form to combat Garp as he went rogue. Garp countered with Galaxy Impact, delivering an extremely powerful shockwave that destroyed his surroundings. In the ensuing chaos, Garp saw Sakazuki go after Ace as he tried to escape. Leaving Sengoku, Garp headed for Sakazuki and smashed him into the ground before telling Ace to run. Whitebeard saw this and assisted with his tremors as the Whitebeard Pirates quickly rushed to give Ace support to make his escape. Everyone else was too busy to properly run after Ace, and he made it to Whitebeard's side. Meanwhile, Zoro watched as these events played out and realized the difference in power between him and people like Whitebeard, the Admirals, and even Garp. Seeing Ace had made it out alive, Garp stopped resisting and was restrained by Sengoku and Sakazuki. The rest of the Marines went after the Whitebeard Pirates just as Shanks appeared to put a stop to the war. Both the Pirates and the Marines suffered numerous losses, but in this instance, I believe that the major players made it out alive. Shanks' appearance caused the Marines to reel back, as fighting two emperors at the same time would not bode well for them. Blackbeard was unable to enact his plan of stealing the Devil Fruit from Whitebeard, and the fact that Garp had gone rogue dealt a major blow to the Marines. Even the warlords were too fickle, and it wasn't guaranteed that they would put themselves at risk just to fight against the Marines. All in all, Shanks' appearance would be a major factor in this, just like before. Only the major difference is that in the original timeline, Ace was executed by Sakazuki while trying to save Luffy, and even Whitebeard was killed. As such, when Shanks appeared, the Marines were more than willing to go for a ceasefire since their main objectives were achieved. In this timeline, Ace is still alive, even though his public execution was meant to be a show of power and a message to pirates across the world. Besides that, one of their heroes had gone rogue and had chosen to free the pirate on death's row. Thirdly, an Emperor of the Sea was still alive and kicking. This put the Marines at a significant disadvantage, both in terms of power and in terms of political maneuvering. Do you think they'd back down from a fight against two emperors to get back Ace? I think they wouldn't. Considering the damage the Marines took and the reduction of morale due to Garp going rogue, I doubt the Marines would be keen on picking a fight with both Shanks and Whitebeard, and would rather recuperate their losses and deal with Garp. After the Paramount War, Garp is sent to Impel Down until further judgment. Ace has reunited with Whitebeard, and the crew goes to lick their wounds. Mihawk and Zoro head back to Kurigana Island, with Zoro having achieved a new level of respect for the strongest powers in the world, despite him being stronger than a vast majority of players who participated in the war. With renewed passion, Zoro gets back to even more advanced training, implementing everything he knows about Haki as Mihawk teaches him how to harness its power even further. 2 more years pass, and Zoro reaches a point where his power is nothing to scoff at. He achieves an insane level of mastery over armament and observation Haki. Mihawk notices that his son even has the potential to unleash Conqueror's Haki, but he avoids telling him of it, intending to let Zoro learn himself. It wasn't until the Reverie that things truly got complicated. The final decision to dismantle the warlord system was made in the aftermath of the Reverie, where the leaders of various nations voted to end the arrangement, citing the numerous betrayals and the realization that the warlords posed as significant a threat as the pirates they were supposed to counterbalance. This decision aimed to restore true justice and reduce the power of individual pirates who had long manipulated the system for their own ends, coupled with the fact that they had developed living weapons that were even stronger than the Pacifista, the Seraphim. The development of the Seraphim involved a combination of cutting-edge technology and genetic engineering. They are based on the DNA of powerful and influential pirates, most notably the former warlords of the sea. By using the lineage factor, Vegapunk and his team were able to replicate the abilities and traits of these formidable pirates, enhancing them with cybernetic modifications to create superior combatants. The Seraphim possess incredible strength, durability, and various abilities derived from the Devil Fruits and the unique skills of the original warlords. Additionally, they are equipped with advanced weaponry and programmed with a high level of obedience to ensure they remain under the control of the world government. The decision sent waves across the seas as the previously protected warlords would now be under the threat of the Marines. Now, this is similar to what happened in the original timeline, but how do you think things would change now that Mihawk was backed by a relatively overpowered Zoro? Let's see. A siege would soon take place on the island of Kurigana as the Marines intended to capture Mihawk. It would be quite short-lived though, as the Marines posed little threat to the overpowered father-son duo. Mihawk was actually a bit excited to become a wanted criminal again, since it just meant a bit more training for Zoro. It would be a short-lived excitement though, as Mihawk and Zoro soon grew tired of the Marines who kept swarming Kurigana. Much like in the original timeline, Mihawk was approached by Crocodile, who came up with a plan for the two to work together and form a guild. The Cross Guild's primary objective would be to disrupt the balance of power by targeting Marines and offering bounties on their heads, effectively reversing the traditional bounty system used by the world government. Considering that the guild would consist of two former warlords of the sea, among which Mihawk is known as the world's strongest swordsman, Crocodile stated that the world government would not take the two lightly. Mihawk agrees to be a part of the Cross Guild along with Zoro, leading to the creation of one of the strongest guilds around. The Marines were quick to acknowledge the threat the Cross Guild posed and gave them a threat level equal to an Emperor of the Sea. As such, even Zoro achieved an excessive boost in notoriety, seemingly overnight. Since Buggy was never defeated by Luffy, he never went to Impel Down, and as such, he was never there during the Paramount War. He's probably still hanging around in Orange Town, being a small-time menace, while the Cross Guild is recognized without the clown. The addition of bounties on the heads of Marines led to a significant threat to the power structure of the world, leading to waves across the seas. Meanwhile, Zoro had gotten so far along with his training that he began to pose a significant threat, taking down many of the Marines who were given a bounty by the Cross Guild. Many other pirates ended up joining the guild due to their quickly growing influence. By this point, Zoro was able to effectively take on Mihawk and stand toe-to-toe with him, although he had not yet surpassed his father. After the events of the Paramount War, there were some changes in the structure of the Marines. Sengoku retired from his position as Fleet Admiral, and Sakazuki inherited the position. Kuzan left the Marines, and two new admirals were appointed, one of which is a swordsman named Fujitora. By this point, Zoro would need to find stronger opponents on the seas to compete with and fulfill his dream. Which swordsman do you think he should compete with next? Zoro would have gotten to the point where he's extremely powerful, but not yet on the levels of the top swordsmen. Zoro also needs to unlock his Conqueror's Haki. But how do you think he'll end up doing that? Let's find out. Mihawk determines that Zoro needs to test his mettle against an admiral of the Marines, so he decides to have Zoro fight against Fujitora. The father and son duo get information from Crocodile's network and head for the Marine Admiral, but Mihawk intends to stay on the sidelines. The two find the Admiral on the seas. Upon sensing the two swordsmen, Fujitora immediately stops his subordinates from attacking, letting the two approach the ship without resistance for fear that the lower-ranking Marines would all lose their lives. When Zoro comes face-to-face with Fujitora, he requests that the Admiral duel him. Accepting the request, they head to a nearby island and begin their battle. Zoro immediately realizes that despite being blind, Fujitora is among the strongest opponents he has faced after his father. The two lock swords, and the fight proceeds to be an extravagant display of power. Fujitora's gravity manipulation powers prove to be more than a significant nuisance, but Zoro is still able to keep up with him. The fight goes on for hours before Fujitora actually gets serious, and Zoro has to bring on the big guns as well. Zoro imbues his sword with Haki, turning the blade pitch black, and begins aggressively attacking Fujitora. In this situation, Zoro doesn't have his original attack arsenal, but will be incorporating something different. Fujitora doesn't let up either and stays on the defensive before knocking Zoro back. Frustrated by how he isn't able to defeat Fujitora, Zoro's emotions become a bit errant, and his Haki begins spewing out. Zoro uses a move he is saving for his father, Asura. In a move that defies the laws of physics, a silhouette appears behind Zoro, making it seem like he's dual-wielding three massive swords. Zoro lunges at Fujitora and begins madly attacking him, resembling a demonic god. Both Mihawk and Fujitora are caught off guard due to the sudden surge in power as Zoro's blade begins crackling with Conqueror's Haki. Zoro puts it all in his attack and clashes with Fujitora, the impact of which causes massive shockwaves across the island. Despite blocking the attack, Fujitora is pushed back and ends up hitting a massive rock, smashing against it and sustaining heavy injuries. On the other hand, Zoro's surge of power drains him and he falls to the ground exhausted. Seeing an opportunity, Fujitora decides to use his powers to finish Zoro off, but Mihawk intervenes and carries his son away from the fray. Zoro wakes up back at the Cross Guild base, his wounds bandaged up. After realizing that Zoro has Conqueror's Haki, Mihawk would begin training him on how to harness it. This is where the time skip would occur. After months of intensive training under Mihawk, Zoro's mastery over Conqueror's Haki had improved significantly. Determined to test his newly honed skills, he decided it was time to rematch Fujitora. With Mihawk's blessing, Zoro set out once more, this time with the intent to prove his growth and further solidify his reputation as one of the world's greatest swordsmen. Crocodile's network provided the necessary information, and Zoro tracked Fujitora to a remote island where the Admiral was stationed. As he approached the island, he could feel the familiar tension of an impending duel. Zoro landed on the shore, his swords at the ready, and made his way toward the heart of the island. Fujitora, sensing Zoro's presence, stood awaiting his arrival. The two warriors faced each other, the atmosphere charged with the promise of an epic battle. Zoro shouted Fujitora's name and pointed his sword at him, aiming for a rematch. Fujitora smiled, his blind eyes seeming to see more than most. He instantly noticed Zoro's immense change in aura and was shocked to see how much a few months could change. Without further ado, the two swordsmen clashed, their blades ringing out with the force of their strikes. Zoro's movements were more refined, his attacks more precise. He seamlessly integrated his Conqueror's Haki into his fighting style, creating creating a formidable force that even Fujitora found challenging to counter. Fujitora, using his gravity manipulation, tried to keep Zoro at bay. The ground beneath him cracked and shifted, but Zoro's resolve remained unshaken. He had come too far to be deterred now. This time, however, Zoro's conqueror's haki was controlled and focused. His strikes were sharper, his defenses stronger. Fujitora, despite his vast experience, found himself pushed to his limits. The island shook with the force of their clash, shockwaves rippling outward. With a final, powerful strike, Zoro's blade met Fujitora's. The air crackled with energy as their haki collided. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a surge of power, Zoro's attack broke through Fujitora's defenses. The Admiral was sent sprawling, his sword knocked from his grasp. Zoro stood over him, breathing heavily but triumphant. Fujitora, lying on the ground, smiled up at him and acknowledged his growth. Instead of dealing the finishing blow, Zoro extended a hand to help Fujitora to his feet. As they stood together, the tension of the battle faded, replaced by mutual respect. Zoro had proven himself, not only to Fujitora, but to himself as well. With this victory, he knew he was one step closer to achieving his ultimate dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. The rematch with Fujitora marked a significant milestone in Zoro's journey. His reputation spread even further, and the Cross Guild's influence grew. Zoro's path was set, and with each battle, he edged closer to his destiny. Zoro would continue his journey, and eventually would have to fight with other allies against the Gorosei and the world government, because there would come a point when the elders would have to intervene. Considering the amount of power the different forces on the sea have amassed, an all-out war between the pirates and the world government would begin, and Zoro may even get to fight against St. Ethan Baron Fife Nusjuro, the Gorosei who wields a blade. And also there is the final fight against his own father, Dracula Mihawk, to become the best swordsman. But with that, I'll leave to your imagination. If you liked the video, be sure to click the like button, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more One Piece videos like this one.